now by Oludamilare Adesola, Associate Director of Control Risk, to help us review some of our top stories in more detail. Welcome to the show, Damilare. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me
This morning. And thanks for making it on the Lagos Marathon Day.
Yes,
it was quite a trek coming into the office.
It was a marine navigation.
Indeed. Let's start with the land policy story in South Africa. Trump has slapped some sanctions on South Africa. South Africa has talked back. Mm-hmm. What is this hula baloo all about?
So on one hand, we did expect that Trump will pull back on a lot of different aid and foreign assistance, and his foreign policy would be an American first, take an American first approach. But I think we're a little bit surprised that he's then, going back to say issues of democracy, of civil rights, and using that as the anchor or the basis for the suspension of the freezing of the aid programs. And I think that that's interesting because it then shows one of the things that we had projected in control risk was that each bilateral relationship was going to be assessed on its own merit, and it's not going to be a case where it's, oh, America is just helping everybody and just Father Christmas of the world. But instead, it's what are we getting in return? But now we're still looking like they're still, while they don't want to maintain the Santa Claus of the world, they're still maintaining the sort of policeman of the world and policing different governments and their policies and saying this one is right, this one is wrong, and the land issue is so sensitive with the history of apartheid, and so I find it very interesting. It's literally a game of chess, and I'm just very curious to see what the next move.
Do we know how much aid the U.S. has been providing to South Africa?
So approximately $440 million yearly.
Okay,
that was the amount for 2023, and a lot of that goes into HIV/AIDS programs, PEPFOR, I think that's what it's called. So there will definitely be we felt there will be a big gulf left if that persists for much longer, and the South African government is going to have to reassess a lot of things. I mean, that was the basis. We'll talk about the story, but that was the basis for the Senate saying that they want to increase because they're expecting that it would also freeze Nigeria's aid. And so a lot of different African countries just have to think about whatever reason they state for it. It's bound to happen, and it may not be a total freeze. It may be a reduction or whatever it is.
And do we expect the coalition government led by Ramaphosa and the DA in South Africa to capitulate to Trump's? Will they come around the table, or is this kind of a ego trip, if you like? Will they save face? Is this policy really being implemented in a negative way right now in South Africa?
So the policy is historic. It's been there for the longest time. I mean, one of the triggers is his relationship, Trump's relationship with Elon Musk. Elon Musk was born in South Africa, and so there was a lot of the white minorities and land taking from them, and so the history is very dicey. The same thing. One of the other reasons why they've cited is South Africa filing a case against Israel in the ICJ. So there's a lot of different sensitive issues that are on the topic of conversation, but the president is very keen on explaining itself as opposed to changing its stance. Say, actually, this is the reason why we're doing this. Maybe you don't know the history. Maybe you don't know what is at stake for us and how this is actually the same way you're saying that you don't want to support governments that are not supportive of your own anti-American stance. The same way that we also have our own South African stance. And so they're doing a roadshow, and they said that Washington is going to be one of the stops that they go to. Okay. There's also supposed to be the G20, although the U.S. State Secretary said he's not going to attend that. South Africa currently has the presidency for the G20, and they're supposed to do the event next week in Johannesburg, but the U.S. is boycotting that. So it's interesting times.
It's interesting times indeed, because there's that tension between America wanting to pull back from its hegemony globally, but also in some ways also subtly still interfering in domestic affairs. It'll be interesting to watch how this pans out. Let's move on to another story now. The AFDB has committed $3 billion to a special agro-industrial processing zone. We know that the AFDB has always been big on agriculture in Africa, especially because the AFDB president, Adesola, was a former agriculture prime minister, but minister, I beg your pardon. But what is different about this new investment initiative?
I don't think anything's different. I think it was just reiterating his commitment to it. So in Nigeria, for example, they've done the special economic zones focused on agro-processing. It's been in for about 12 years now since the first one. And different states come and they sort of counterpart funding with the AFDB. They give the land and they do some other things. So it's very, very, it's an exciting project that we just, We haven't gotten to the point where we're seeing the benefit just yet, because it does take a lot of time to establish the different infrastructure that needs to be there, connecting farm to market, but then even also having the investors actually come on the, because it's one thing for you to set it up and be like, oh, we have this, but another thing for investors to say, okay, yes, I'm willing to move my farm here, I'm willing to move my factory here. And so I think that it's a long-term game, and I think that in the long term, Nigeria specifically would really benefit from those sort of programs and supported by the AFDB.
Yeah, interesting, because earlier in the show I was talking about the fact that the Nigeria Export Promotion Council, had said last year non-oil exports had reached about $5.4 billion in value, and agriculture being one of the main foundations for that growth, which we saw from 2023, 20% growth actually. So clearly agriculture is going to be key. In terms of overall just the agricultural sector and its contribution to the Nigerian economy for 2025, are we likely to see a major shift in that contribution in a positive way?
I don't think it will be significant. It will still stay around the 20 to 25%. But what I would say is expected to have an uptick is agro-processing. So even when we talk about export, sometimes I pause before popping my champagne. I'm like, let's see, it's still raw materials. We're still exporting cocoa. We're still exporting cashew and sesame seeds. We're not doing any level of processing. And you look at all the numbers that are going out, and you think of the value. If we could just process this, we could double or triple the value, and then these numbers would significantly increase. So I think that we could see that potentially in this year, having more the manufacturing sector having growth, especially with FMCGs, food and beverages, and seeing an increase in that.
Okay, great, fantastic. And I want to talk about the poultry farmers in Nigeria, because the news is that they've been struggling to make profit as a result of rising cost of feed. I mean, it all kind of ties back into the same cycle of agricultural production, productivity of land, and all of that. But why is this so significant for the agricultural space, this issue with poultry farmers?
So I think what it is the competition with other. So if you look at other forms of meat for cows, for example, they're eating grass. They're not eating food that human beings are eating. But there's a competition for food where it's like maize. Yes, we're one of the largest producers of maize in Africa, after South Africa. But at the same time, we are also eating the staple food. Maize is a staple food locally. Obviously, we know that we have had to turn away from wheat with all the issues with Russia and Ukraine and the disruptions globally in the supply chains. But at the same time, it's saying, okay, but the maize rather is not enough. To do both, staple food, feeding ourselves, and then also having the poultry farmers. And so there's that competition that is causing the uptick in prices. And I think that it's going to continue to be a conversation of whether we are looking to be self-sufficient and say, okay, we're closing up, which is what the stance that the government is taking. We're no more, imports of wheat. We're taking a very strong stance. We need to grow the sector. But at the same time, you're then having a constraint in prices. So they had to do the temporary open of the ban of the window and then just ease some of these because, have some waivers for maize importation. It was about 20% before for wheat especially, and having to just put waivers because it wasn't practical at the end of the day when it came to the pricing and the availability of these products. So it's kind of like a cycle. And you mentioned addition, and one of the things he's saying is like, biting the bullet in the short term to say, okay, yes, it'll be tight in the short term, but the more you continue to open your borders and let maize imports come in, it would stabilize prices. It would help poultry farmers temporarily, but we'll always continue to be in this situation because the local industry will not grow.
Yeah, and of course, ultimately, the game is food security and self-sufficiency in agricultural production. Well, let's shift gears a bit to the Nigerian budget. Lawmakers passed the $36.6 billion, about 55 trillion naira budget, which was an additional increase on top of the president's proposed increase. Why this increase?
So they're stating that the expectation for the cut in aid from the U.S. means that the government is going to have to, increase its spend on humanitarian issues and some of the things that the USAID was supporting. I mean, the USAID has. So the USAID as an entity has a very strong presence in Nigeria. They do a lot of work with different organizations around health, around especially maternal health, but also even other programs around education. So it's vast. The extent of their reach is vast. So if it comes to our turn, when there's a cut, and there's a pullback, even now there's been a global cut generally. They've said that they're pausing a lot of their foreign assistance, but if they come down, they drill down, they focus on us and say no more Nigeria support in these many ways, the government is going to have to step in. But should this be something that we're doing now at this time, I think that's where I'm just like,
Why? Tell me why. Is it around the sustainability of
it's around the sustainability, it's around priority. I always say that if it's like taking money and throwing it up in the air and just, you have too many things. You have to prioritize, you have to focus, otherwise you will end up doing nothing. And so it's a case where it's like, yes, we have the issues and we have the different programs, but rather than say you want to increase your spending, how about you then go and solicit other different, the US is not the only aid provider. EU is also remains one of our largest sources of aid. And so just saying, okay, let's focus.
But, Damilare, we've been moving a lot from the aid narrative. Trade, not aid. Investment, not aid. So should we even be soliciting from aid, from handouts from other countries?
If you're saying the short term, because yes, those are long-term goals, investment, trade, boosting our, agro-processing industries, that's in the long term. But in the short term, the people that they're helping, they will feel it and it will be evident, because the extent of it is really strong. Even looking at it's about $200 million that they spend yearly in Nigeria alone. And although a lot of that, I have my thoughts about the operational costs. A lot of that is the operational costs and paying their expatriates. But when you actually come to see how much is spent, it's still very significant.
Yeah.
But whether the government should be stepping in to plug that, I'm not really sure.
Okay.
And also because I also have some reservations about the management of the funds. When it comes to the corruption that ends up being in that chain, and at the end of the day, how much is going to end up in the hands of the people that actually need it.
Okay. Well, I guess the flip side of that is hopefully we're closer to having the government assent to the budget, and we have some clarity around the path for 2025 insofar as the government's fiscal plans are concerned. Of course, we have the tax reform bill on the one hand, so at least let's consolidate the policy trajectory so that we have line of sight to economic growth potentially.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of our segment. We can't take any more stories. Thank you so much for being with us today, Oludamilare, of Control Risk, Associate Director. Thank you so much.